Khalid Al Mansoor, the privileged heir of one of Dubai's richest families, and Maria, a young Filipina maid chasing dreams of a better life, lived in two very different worlds. Yet their secret relationship would collide in the most tragic way, ending in betrayal, murder, and the downfall of a family once thought untouchable. The city of Dubai shimmered with endless towers of glass and steel, where wealth was measured not just in money but in reputation. At the center of this glittering society stood the Al-Mansor family, one of the most powerful names in the region. Their fortune stretched across oil, construction, and international trade, making them untouchable in the eyes of many. The family villa was a palace in its own right, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens, marble halls, and a constant flow of staff ensuring every detail of life was flawless. Behind the polished gates, however, lived stories that no guest or associate could ever imagine. Among the household staff was Maria, a young Filipina woman who had left her small village in search of work to support her family back home. Like many others, she had dreams of giving her siblings an education and her parents a life free of hardship. To the outside world, she was invisible, another domestic worker in a city where servants blended into the background. But within the walls of the villa, her presence did not go unnoticed. She caught the eye of Khalid Al Mansoor, the only son and heir to the family empire. Khalid was known publicly as the perfect example of discipline and responsibility. He studied at elite schools, attended business meetings alongside his father, and carried himself with the confidence of someone born into privilege. Yet beneath that polished exterior, Khalid harbored a restless side. He longed for freedom from the suffocating expectations that came with his name. In Maria, he found something different from the carefully arranged world he had always known. She was kind, attentive, and genuine in a way few people around him ever were. What began as stolen glances grew into secret encounters. The vast villa, with its endless rooms and hidden corners, provided a backdrop for their growing connection. To Maria, Khalid's attention felt like a chance at belonging in a world that had always kept her on the outside. To Khalid, it was a reckless escape, a forbidden thrill he believed he could control. Their relationship was built on silence and shadows, carefully hidden from the sharp eyes of his parents and the gossip of the staff. But secrets in a house filled with so many people are fragile, and every moment carried the risk of exposure. While the Al-Mansor family presented perfection to the world behind their locked gates, a dangerous bond was forming, one that would eventually set in motion a tragedy no amount of wealth could bury. Maria's discovery of her pregnancy changed everything. For weeks, she had carried the secret inside her, unsure of how Khalid would react. At first, she imagined it as a blessing, a chance to bind their hidden relationship with permanence. She pictured Khalid softening, perhaps even protecting her and the child they had created together. But her hope was quickly overshadowed by the suffocating weight of reality. In a household built on reputation and pride, a maid carrying the heir's child was not a miracle, but a scandal that could destroy lives. When Maria finally revealed the truth, Khalid's world spiraled into fear. For him, the pregnancy was not about love or family. It was a ticking clock counting down to humiliation. Every passing day meant the secret grew harder to hide. He imagined his father's cold rage, his mother's disappointment, and the whispering voices of Dubai's elite. In their world, image was everything. A single blemish could undo decades of carefully cultivated respect. The thought of being reduced to mockery, of his name dragged through the gossip columns, filled him with dread. Maria, however, was not thinking of prestige or honor. She was thinking of survival. She had sacrificed everything to come to Dubai, and now the child growing inside her was the one thing she could truly call her own. She wanted recognition, stability, and perhaps the smallest piece of the life Khalid had promised her in hushed words. But as her body began to show signs of her condition, the gulf between their desires grew wider. What she saw as hope, Khalid saw as doom. Whispers among the staff added to the pressure. Servants exchanged knowing looks, some suspecting what Maria tried to keep hidden. In a house where secrets were currency, it was only a matter of time before word slipped beyond the villa walls. Khalid's paranoia sharpened with every rumor. He avoided the staff, snapped at anyone who asked harmless questions, and began plotting how to silence the truth. He oscillated between desperate schemes, sending Maria away, bribing her into silence, or convincing her to terminate the pregnancy. But each idea faltered under the weight of reality. As Maria's belly grew, so did Khalid's terror. He felt trapped, cornered by a future he hadn't chosen, one that threatened to shatter the legacy he had been raised to protect. What Maria carried was more than a child. It was a secret too dangerous for their world to ever accept. In the silence of his fear, a darker thought began to take root, a thought that would soon turn deadly. Khalid's mind became a battlefield of dread and denial, as the reality of Maria's pregnancy closed in around him. Each passing day stripped away the illusion that he could control the situation. His family's influence was powerful, but even their wealth could not rewrite the truth of a child born from scandal. For a man raised to believe that honor outweighed everything, the shame of exposure was unbearable. He convinced himself that if the secret was revealed, it would not only ruin him, but would also destroy the family name his father had spent decades building. That fear consumed him until there was no room left for reason. At first, Khalid tried to bury his panic beneath cold calculations. He thought of sending Maria back to the Philippines quietly, paying her enough money to vanish from his life. But he knew she would not go willingly, not when the child represented her only chance at a different future. He considered hiding her away in another city, but in Dubai's tightly watched society, even the smallest whisper could grow into scandal. Every plan seemed to fail before it could even begin. The only path he could see was one that terrified him and yet seemed, in his eyes, inevitable. One night, after pacing his room in silence for hours, Khalid made his decision. It would be quick, it would be final, and it would erase the problem before it reached his father's ears. He told himself it was not murder but protection. Protection of his family, protection of his name, protection of everything that defined him. It was a twisted logic, but fear has a way of bending morality into something unrecognizable. He chose the guest house at the far end of the estate as the place to carry out his plan. The building stood mostly unused, surrounded by shadows and silence, a perfect cover. Under the pretense of wanting to talk privately, he led Maria there late at night. She followed, unaware of the storm raging in his thoughts, still holding on to fragile hope that he might accept her and the child. Khalid, however, had already silenced that possibility in his heart. In the darkness of that isolated space, the final act played out swiftly. Maria's life was taken, her unborn child lost with her. When it was over, Khalid's hands trembled, but his mind clung desperately to the belief that he had saved his family from ruin. He staged the scene with cold precision, arranging the room to look like an accident, convincing himself that no one would ever question it. But what he failed to realize was that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of clawing back into the light. Maria's sudden disappearance was explained away with a simple story. She had decided to return to the Philippines. The Al-Mansor family presented this explanation with quiet certainty, assuming no one would dare question them. Her absence was framed as a personal choice, a worker going back home after years of service. But for those who had lived alongside her in the villa, the story did not fit. Maria had left behind clothes neatly folded in her drawers, small personal items scattered on her bedside table, and most importantly, her passport still tucked away in the staff quarters. For a woman supposedly on a journey back home, she had taken nothing that mattered. The silence surrounding her departure quickly turned into whispers. Other maids exchanged worried glances, noting that Maria had seemed uneasy in the weeks before she vanished. A gardener claimed he had heard muffled cries near the guest house on the night she disappeared, though he later grew quiet when pressed about the details. It was enough to catch the attention of local investigators, who began to peel back the surface of the Al-Mansor family's story. Their wealth and influence slowed the investigation at first, but small cracks in the carefully built cover began to widen. When security footage from the villa was reviewed, something alarming came to light. Cameras captured Khalid leading Maria toward the guest house late one evening, but there was no record of her leaving. Hours passed, the cameras kept rolling, yet Maria never reappeared. Khalid, however, returned alone, his expression hard and unsettled. It was evidence that could not be explained away, no matter how many strings the family tried to pull. Forensics teams were discreetly brought into the case, working quietly to avoid drawing attention from Dubai's gossip-hungry elite. Soil samples around the outskirts of the estate raised suspicions of recent disturbance, and traces of Maria's belongings were discovered in areas where she had no reason to be. The family attempted to stall the search with money and connections, but investigators had already locked onto Khalid as the central figure in the puzzle. The carefully constructed image of the perfect heir began to unravel. The more Khalid tried to shield himself with silence, the guiltier he appeared. His father's empire could protect him from many things, but not from the trail of evidence left behind. What Khalid believed had been a flawless cover-up was now collapsing around him, piece by piece, as the truth edged closer to the surface. The investigation reached its breaking point when a team of forensic experts followed faint traces of disturbed sand beyond the villa's manicured gardens. In the barren stretch of desert less than a mile from the estate, they uncovered what Khalid had tried so desperately to conceal. Buried in a shallow grave was Maria's body, her features still marked by the violence she had endured. The autopsy revealed what investigators already suspected. She had been pregnant at the time of her death. The discovery transformed the case from whispers of suspicion into a scandal that could no longer be contained. News of the crime spread swiftly, carried through the city by both official reports and hushed gossip. Dubai's elite, who had once praised the Al-Mansor family as untouchable, now watched in shock as their perfect image crumbled. The story of a billionaire's son murdering his maid to protect family honor was too powerful to silence, too horrifying to ignore. The same wealth and influence that Khalid had believed would protect him now worked against him, magnifying the public outrage. People demanded answers, and the authorities could no longer look away. Khalid was arrested under the unrelenting eyes of both the press and society. For the first time in his life, the weight of his family name did not shield him, but dragged him down. The trial that followed became one of the most talked-about cases in the region. Witnesses testified about Maria's disappearance, the gardener recalled the screams, and surveillance footage showed the truth that Khalid had tried to erase. The shallow attempts to disguise her death as an accident fell apart under the pressure of evidence. For the Al-Mansor family, the scandal was more than a legal battle. It was the destruction of everything they had built their reputation upon. Business partners quietly withdrew, investors stepped away, and the name that once commanded respect now carried the stain of blood. What Khalid had tried to protect with violence was the very thing he ended up destroying. In the end, justice was served, but it came at a devastating cost. Maria's story became a symbol of vulnerability, a reminder of the countless silent workers whose struggles often go unseen. Khalid, once the golden heir, was left with nothing but the memory of his crime and the legacy of disgrace. The Al-Mansor empire remained standing in stone and steel, but its honor was gone forever, shattered by the actions of the son who thought he could bury the truth in the desert sands.